Hello, welcome to the Viewpoint. I am Mamadou Mboj. The spate of reforms, be it institutional or legal, currently ongoing, they will remain mere paper reforms without the social dimension. Of course, not least because it's human beings who would give life to these institutions, and it is human beings who would also enforce the laws. But human beings are really quite complex. This is what psychologists tell us. We are various and we are complex. But again, before I can genuinely understand the social, I'll have to have some grasp of the individual. And whenever we talk about complexity, psychology comes in, which we need to understand to really understand society. And I think it was Bertrand Russell, the English philosopher, who once remarked that in our discussions of politics, we take insufficient account of psychology, which really goes to the heart of it. So today on The Viewpoint, we want to redress that somewhat. I've got as a guest today Professor Lamin Sidibe. He is currently a lecturer in psychology and behavioral science at the American International University. And before that, he was with the UTG, the University of the Gambia, where he was also lecturing psychology, but he was also the dean of the Students' Affairs. He was also a member of the Governing Council, among other things. He has also worked for the UN with UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, serving in Somalia, Sudan, and other African countries for 15 years. Eminently qualified to take us through some of the psychological insights which we really need in this age, this period of reform we are in. Welcome to The Viewpoint, Professor Sidibe.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
As you rightly said, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. This is a completely different scenario compared to Kachadula. Yes. And it's very pertinent to my work, my profession, my career also. So I'm very happy, particularly, to be here today so that we can share our experiences. Indeed, as you rightly said, institutions are not in a vacuum. Institutions are run by human beings. And the psychology is about human behavior and mental processes. If you have a structural institutional reform without reforming the elements that conduct or run those institutions, you may not be very successful. So I think it's a very wise and thoughtful idea to try to find out who are these people we're talking about. How are we brought on this earth? How are we raised or brought up? And what are the challenges in the traditional days and what are the challenges now? And what we can do, what can we do to help our children and young people to be able to cope with the challenges of contemporary society, and in order to run the institutions that the government is trying to reform. So I think this is what you're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. So you've partly answered the first question I was going to pose to you.
But you can
what
still
exactly is
elaborate.
Psychology in many ways? What is psychology a study of?
Thank you very much. Psychology is not speculative anymore. There was a time when it was considered not to be scientific because people looked at human behavior speculatively or with intuitions, or intuitively. But modern psychology is simply the scientific study of behavior, human and animal, because we learn a lot by studying animals to help human beings. I can give some examples later. And mental processes. This is still not satisfactory with certain schools of thought. When we say behavior is something you can see. It's overt. When I laugh, you will see that I'm laughing. When I'm angry, I think you'll observe that I'm angry. So that's overt. That's the behavioral aspect. The mental process is what you may not be able to see, because what you are thinking about, I may be looking at you with a smile when I'm very annoyed with you, or I may not like you, or I may look at you with a grimace face when I may like you. So that's the mental process aspect. So that's why in psychology we have various schools of thought. There are some psychologists who emphasize more on the behavioral aspect, that it is what is visible that matters, never mind the mind. Whereas others believe that what happens in our brains, mental processes, that's what is important in studying people. So there came a time when we all agreed that, okay, let's say scientific study of behavior, which is overt, and mental processes, which is covert, is inside, you cannot see, but certain thoughts will lead you to some behaviors. So we anticipate, that's why we can predict certain behaviors by people's thinking. But it does not always guarantee, because somebody, for example, can campaign for you in elections and be talking and say, oh, he's staunch party X or party Y, but he may not vote for you.
Exactly.
You see, so it's very difficult to predict, but it helps with this the knowledge base to be able to predict people's behavior. Now, this definition is still not very satisfactory, because there are people who are biologically oriented. We call them biopsychologists or biological psychologists, who believe more in the central nervous system, in what we inherit, because they believe, for example, that if your intelligence is to a great extent, for example, inherited, I believe that it may be inherited, you may be predisposed as an intelligent person, but if the environment does not nurture it or stimulate it, then that intelligence may not manifest. But we have also seen families, for example, that have maybe very wealthy, but the father is dummy, the mother is dummy, so maybe the theory may stand there. And there are certain families that are very intelligent. Or you are black because your parents are black. So that's clearly a hereditary aspect. So that aspect also is recognized. That is why we are again modifying it to call it biopsychosocial model. The biological, the psychological, and the social model.
Because
again comes the culture again.
Wasn't it? For a long time there was this genetic determinism or environmentalism.
Like,
you earlier talked about behaviorism.
Child Darwin's time, you know.
Yes.
But again, it's a paradigm shift. I mean, theories change all the time as knowledge increases, and because this is why psychology also it's both a theoretical subject and an applied science. Theoretical in the sense that we generate knowledge. Pure research is to acquire knowledge, and knowledge that improves our thinking and understanding of human and animal behavior. For example, there was a time when people were determining hunger by body weight, but now no, not only that, body weight, time of eating, smell, and all this are considered. Or the type of person, you may be very fat and not eat too much. And there are some small people who eat and eat and eat, gammon-dicers, but you don't see it. So the knowledge is something that it changes all the time, and it improves.
That's it. But in this context, I've long heard this criticism that psychology is too Eurocentric. Is there any such thing called African psychology?
I like that word. I love it very much. Look, it may, I cannot say yes or no, because that's one of my actual tasks or challenges, to try to bring about a psychology that is African, if I may be direct, psychology within cultural contexts. So there is some truth in that.
But wasn't it always like that?
It has always been in that. It has always been like that, but this is why some of us who are Africans, psychologists, should try to change that concept, because it is indeed Eurocentric. Because if you look at the proponents, if you go to psychoanalysis, they talk about Freud.
Yeah.
You go to child development or human development, Piaget, Kikoski, Erikson, and stuff. You go to social psychology, they talk about McClellan and so on, Abraham Maslow and stuff. Where is the Kunta Kinte or the Mboch, who also is a human being and has been thinking about human beings? Because their life, I understand, started in Africa.
That's it. But does it mean that their insights are not universal?
You mean whose insights?
For instance,
yes, the Westerners.
Piaget, for instance, Piaget.
You know, they are not universal in certain aspects. In certain aspects, they may be universal, because a child of 3 years anywhere is expected to be able to say at least a few words. Well, where the child fails to do that, that child may be retarded or maybe a little bit delayed. You know what I mean? That's universal. But there are certain aspects. For example, African children are more rhythmic generally. Rhythmic, and they walk, they are more, their motor development is usually quicker. Maybe because our parents put us on our backs, we move a lot, there is more space, generally speaking. But when it comes to speaking, speech, the Western child, the average Western child, talks much earlier in general. Even if you compare Senegal and the Gambia, it seems that the Senegalese seem to be more, actually, more in speaking.
Is this genetic or environmental?
It may be both genetic, but environment is very important. How you stimulate the child, how you encourage the child to talk, how early you talk to the child. It depends on the coaching and the stimulation. But certain, as I said, hereditary aspects do apply, but I believe that it is the environment that nurtures whatever potential or predisposition you may have. I was also saying about the theoretical aspects of generating knowledge, but also it's an applied field. Psychology is also an applied field. The principles and knowledge of psychology are applied in solving our daily life problems. For example, at work, in the office, how do you motivate your staff? How do you resolve conflicts? A political conflict, for example. There's a little bit of that here, listening to their debates, how the kinds of comments I hear here and there. Unfortunately, those are conflicts which need to be resolved. So psychological techniques could be used to solve those kinds of misunderstandings or necessary conflicts, for example. So that's one aspect. It's an applied field in mental, trying to resolve mental problems. Try in health. There's a branch called health psychology, health psychology, which talks about, for example, hypertension, our lifestyle and health. How our lifestyle may be generating some stress which may not be necessary, may be harmful to the health. How your eating habits, do you do exercise or not, smoking, drinking, all these. All these fall under health psychology, and they have to do with our lifestyle, how we live, what we do and what we don't do. You go to social psychology, you're talking about attitudes. You hear a lot in the Gambia, people talk about attitude change. There is need for attitude change. Prejudice, I am discriminated against. This man has prejudice against me. I am stereotypes, like we do. We say all Fullers are Jamfa, but are they all Jamfa? That's stereotyping.
Stereotyping.
All Manjagos never stop fighting, but I know some very peaceful Manjagos. All wall of Futoerek, something like that. Masani Labanta. so these are all part of social psychology. Mm-hmm. What attracts a person to a person? How do we behave in groups? In a group, how does an individual behave in a group?
Precisely.
It's different from sociology, where the sociologists look at the group and family, institutions. But we look at the individual's behavior within a group.
Brings it perfectly to our next question. Yes. What is a self? It's really
a self
very
actually may be difficult to answer,
yes.
But let's try.
Yes.
A self is actually your esteem, what you feel you are. And if your self-esteem is high, if it is too high, it's not good, because you become too much aroused and you become overconfident and you can make serious mistakes which are not reversible.
Maybe the difference between confidence and arrogance.
And arrogance,
yes,
the range.
The range, yeah.
But a self is the way you feel, your personality actually. Yes. Personality which are manifested by certain characteristics. Like in psychology, there are some people who are categorized as abnormal personalities. For example, the social personality is a person who, or personality disorder, is a person who has no remorse, cheats, lies, does things without any conscience. And another example is a dependent personality disorder, a person who cannot decide anything. Even for a lady to buy a dress, she has to consult her friend. What do I buy? What do I cook for my husband today? Another person, all the time. And if it is pervasive for a long time, and at a certain age, then that is what we call dependent personality disorder. Another personality disorder.
Yes, we hear these personality types or disorders, but really, in our experience with human beings, they're perhaps more complex than that. There is a tendency for one to be in a given way, but you find
in one situation,
in one situation, but you find in another situation they behave differently.
Yeah, that's
so
correct.
That complexity within the individual,
that is correct.
Quite intriguing.
Very interesting comment or observation. Now, when we talk about these personality disorders, let's be mindful of one fact: is that they are not a fait accompli. They can overlap. You know what I mean? A person with an antisocial personality disorder can also have elements of paranoia, and that is paranoid personality disorder, and vice versa. But where certain criteria or characteristics are dominant, we have certain criteria we use. Is if the criteria or the factors are dominant in a person's behavior, then that person may qualify more as a paranoid personality than, for example, an avoidant personality disorder.
So is it a question of dominance and recessive genes?
Like in genetics.
In genetics.
If my genes are more dominant, then the child looks more like me, for example. But definitely, yes, they do overlap. And it's very difficult to categorize exactly 100% to say that he's this. But that we say he seems to fall more within this category or bracket. And it's often proves true. So when you can also have primary diagnosis, is more of a dependent personality, but you may have a secondary one. That he also manifests some degree of schizophrenia or depression, something like that. A mood disorder called depression.
Yes. So because of this complexity, then such notions as self-awareness come into it. Maybe it's important to go into this concept called self-awareness, almost being able to monitor the internal states, the preferences, the intuitions, really knowing yourself. Since, was it Plato, Aristotle, know thyself, or was it Socrates?
Yeah, know thyself.
Know thyself, that has been really the first injunction, as it were, in philosophy. Yes.
Aristotle, Socrates, Plato.
Yes, exactly.
Know thyself.
Know thyself. So this self-awareness, maybe we should just talk a bit on it, because it's really very important. If you want to reform, you need to know yourself a bit to know
from a
how to do
psychological
it.
perspective,
Yes.
I think we should be very conscious of our respective identities. Your identity as an individual, your identity as a Wolof, or your identity as a Gambian. Once you know your identity and you're aware of yourself as a Gambian and as a certain tribe and as a certain family member, that's very important. You know your base. Then, after that, other things are possible. But if you don't know your identity, and unfortunately what is happening now to us is called acculturation, where we are African, but many of our values are something else, very Western. And a typical example is certain dresses are more valued here than any typical Gambian dress if we have. People, you hear them say, oh, this is from Europe, oh, this is from America. What do you have here? So we are not fully aware of what we have, our values. And we are not fully aware of also of ourselves. Because if you speak English, people say, oh, but when you speak Malayalam, something like that. So there are many factors that helps a person to be aware of yourself, to be conscious of your existence.
Absolutely, but here, somebody else, another view, another person can come with the view that Yes, you see this behavior, this conduct, because of perhaps our triple heritage, what Ali Mazrui called our triple heritage, because the Western is also part of our heritage because of the colonial experience, and the Arab, he called it, and the indigenous. That was what Ali Mazrui called the triple heritage.
Yes.
So we have all these different identities, this interplay of different identities, and we have to manage it. When you deny one, you are being inauthentic.
Yeah, but unfortunately, but some people do value our the dominant culture we have. Your dominant culture is because you are an African. Is that you are an African.
And even that some might say cultures. There's really no one African
I know,
culture.
but the similarities.
There are many
I talk
African
more about
cultures.
similarities
All
than
right.
differences.
All right.
Because taking the Gambia as an example, I think our cultural practices are more similar than different. Whether you are Muslim or Christian, and let's not confuse religion also on this.
Oh yes, oh yes. Oh, yes.
Let's say Gambians, not irrespective of religion. If you look at our traditions, marriage ceremonies, funerals, naming ceremonies, our interactions within communities, there are more similarities and unfortunately we dwell more on the differences. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And because we do that, we tend to forget our own roots. And because you forget your roots, you are not strong on your base, any small thing can influence you because your self-consciousness is weak. That is why we tend to be more Arab than the Arabs themselves, more Western than the Western themselves, and less African. Right or wrong? So if the foundation is strong, this is where maybe I hope we are coming to it. Yeah. You know, that how do we bring up, I hope we are coming to it.
We're moving
what
towards
should
that.
happen? Why is it that our parents, my grandfather, was definitely typically more African than myself, or more Gambian?
But isn't that social evolution? Sometimes we call it the generational gap. Just from my parents, I see such a
generational gap, but change.
Yes.
Generational changes, yeah.
Absolutely. It's
generational changes, actually.
Yeah.
Because the generational gap means simply that is your generation, your father's generation, and your generation are different.
Then different perspectives.
Yeah, but there is nothing wrong in these two generations coming together. What to call intergenerational cooperation.
But it always does, doesn't it? But again, innovation comes in.
Where yeah, you mean
innovation?
Yeah, with the IT and all this. But that, I don't think, I don't know if I want to subscribe to that. I don't think that should make us be complacent and give up completely and say that, oh yes, we have so many cultures interfering, so therefore we should just accept what. Is that what you're suggesting?
Absolutely not. only that societies, when they evolve, I mean, they have to encounter or the experiences,
changes, yes.
And then which they have to assimilate somehow.
That is true. Assimilate, but you should adapt yourself to the extent that your core identity remains.
But the core is always shifting as well.
It's
nothing is really
yeah,
stagnant.
but when the core is strong, why is it that the Europeans are not more African now, and many of them come here as tourists?
But they've been changing over the years.
Yeah, but because their basis is stronger than ours, and we are more vulnerable. Let's accept that we are also more vulnerable.
Yes, because of our recent experience,
we are more vulnerable because we seem to be more susceptible to other cultural influences. It's true.
Yes.
We try to assimilate, you use the word, or assume that we are this way because we accept it and we practice it, we forget our own basis.
But don't you think that when we take on these attitudes, these things coming from the West, you call it, they just do not come on a passive plate. They come on an active one, so we change them. In our own way, in the long run. Well, Henry Louis Gates suggests something like that. You would imitate, but again, in the imitation, you transform it. In the long run, it becomes yours. I take, for instance, football from Europe. They took it to Brazil. Now look at it. When we talk about football, we just go to Brazil straight away. They took it and made it into their own.
Unfortunately. Yeah, but like again, this is again money.
You
money
change,
and
adaptation.
How we are brainwashed and how we... Because just to look at the amount of time that the young people spend on football. Just see the amount of money we spend on football, which deviates them from basic things that will help development. You know what I mean? Football was originally for recreation. Now it has become for commercial. And because we are so vulnerable that people fight. They fight, they gamble for football. This is the unfortunate thing. We are too vulnerable to any change. And unfortunately, when we imitate them, we do it worse than they do. And this affects our development. I hardly see the young people, for example, sit down in a VU, drinking attire, talking about development. Boy, how can we get together to have a farm, to do vegetable gardening? They'll be talking about Chelsea, Manchester. That is, to me, that is not healthy. That's not a positive attitude that our children should cultivate. What can we do to reform that?
Or at least to rebalance the scale.
Well, that's
maybe there's nothing wrong with supporting a Chelsea or a Liverpool.
Do you know that I used to be a PE teacher?
See, that's it. So let's just balance.
But that does not stop me from being a
doing
farmer.
other things. Exactly.
And I don't spend unnecessarily a long time debating or arguing because I know what it is doing to me. So I know what you mean. That maybe we cannot disagree that foreign influence, most of the time here in the Gambia, negatively affect us. Negatively, not positively. Or you have a counter foreign. So what do we do?
No.
How do we help our children? Because they are bound to be influenced. It's a global world.
Absolutely.
How do we?
But it's the negative. Maybe they will agree to disagree, perhaps, and then
the negative,
move on.
I'm afraid, is
and that's it.
Like, look at our children.
That's
okay,
it.
maybe.
So we move on a bit. Here we're trying to see, given the insights of psychology now, given the complexity of the human being, as a parent, how do we bring up our children? Really?
That's very good.
Yes, given the direction we want to go.
I would say that take some good ones from the traditional upbringing, and maybe take some good ones in the modern contemporary psychology. But the traditional, I'm very much impressed.
Which is?
When I was a child, I start with because there are others who are older, but I think it's better to use myself as an example, which I have experienced. Our upbringing was what we call in psychology continuous. It was harmonious, gradual, and very systematic, if you want to call it that. How, as children, they feed you and you go to the farm, you play, you help your father, you help your mother. But once you reach the age of what we call adolescence, call it from 12 to 18 before you become an adult to have the right to vote now, then they start teaching you formally how to farm, how to become a parent, how to cook, ladies, how to construct your fence, how to build a house, let it be a thatched house and so on. And you grow within a collective family, and this way you feel more secure, and you are brought up what we call in a gestalt psychology. I don't know if you've read about that. It's holistic manner. And this continues until you go into adulthood. They will prepare you even as a man to take a wife and how you'll be responsible and stuff. For the woman, how to, deal with your husband, how to take care of the household and stuff. Even your farm, rice farm. People were there always to guide you, to counsel you, if you want to say, and to help you to, your age group up to adulthood, so that when the elders are gone or they are not unable, there's a smooth transition between adolescence to adulthood in traditional times. And you hardly hear problems, these kinds of problems will have, depression. People do get depressed, or did get depressed. Crime, stealing, Peer pressure was there. We had age groups or age mates, and we organized wrestling contests. We went to circumcision together for 3 months in the bush, learning how to sign language, learning also how to be responsible. You see, it's done at home, and it is done in groups, community groups. So that was quite harmonious to my mind.
It was a traditional setting.
Traditional setting. The setup
in a city, imagine
but
in the
now,
city, yes.
with the concomitant breakdown, urbanization, economic structures changing, family breakdown, and you have nuclear, rather than and the drift from Badibu to the Combos, from Kiang to the Combos, from the Fuladu to the Combos. You find that if you go to the provinces now, you hardly see the young people. It's mainly women and elderly. Although I've seen a couple of cases where people have attempted to return to the village. That is, if you make the village conducive, and let's hope rural development will expedite it so that people will have an incentive to go back. However, so now, generally speaking, even those in Basi, for example, or Fatoto, are influenced by what I'm coming to say. The transition is not as continuous as it used to be. That's what we call in psychology discontinuous. How? From high school, suddenly you go to work. Some of these young people, adolescents, would hardly go to the farm, would hardly be with their children. Maybe you are here and your parents are up there. So that when you finish, you go straight into work. You are not adequately prepared to take up responsibility as a parent or even to work, not to talk of citizenship. Because at that time, we are told about how we should be responsible to develop the community, and then nation. Community work, community part, become more patriotic from the community level to the. But now, I'm afraid, individualism. In fact, before at that time, children were very respectful to their parents, and they had sympathy for their parents. Today, when we are talking, we generalize. There are exceptions, of course. But today, generally speaking, and this is partly our own fault, we so-called modern or elites. We overprotect our children. We give them whatever they want. In fact, we tell my child. Whereas before it used to be our children. And that's why children had also sympathy somehow for the parents. But today, the child would have sympathy for himself. You hardly hear the children talking about my father, my mother, myself.
So you mean
because
the communal has atomized?
The communal has really atomized, has broken down. And that is affecting these children's. And what is even more critical to my mind as a psychologist is that emotionally, I think we were better equipped. You could cope better, persevere better. Your resilience was much stronger, generally speaking, again, than these children. We've done some studies, I know.
Absolutely, but somebody can also accuse you of sort of, in a sense, romanticizing your age, being biased towards your age.
Well, the advantage these ones have today, maybe relative, is that the opportunities they have, like going to school today is very easy. I don't know if you tried it, but I went to school barefooted. I went to school barefooted.
Yes.
And it was sometimes you will stay at home for three weeks before your father was able to pay your school fees. And when you didn't pay, you were out.
That's it. So it seems as if much of what we did, it wasn't really the ideal. So anybody who's got the opportunity, then you will change it. So much of you did, some of it wasn't out of choice. It was perhaps out of circumstances, necessity. So anybody who can afford to get out of that would.
Yes, that is true, but I'm saying in general that the upbringing mode then, where parents had more time for their children, I think this is what is important. More, not the material aspect necessarily, more time for their children and gave them more attention and involved them more in the daily activities. That made them stronger and more resistant. And it made us and the others who are trying it now cope better with life than the ones now. And they had more autonomy in taking decisions about certain actions than now. These ones who do not have that opportunity to have been brought up harmoniously like I've described are more vulnerable. and they are subject to influences that can lead them to illicit behaviors or activities, such as dangerous protests, such as crime, such as drinking, such as, for example, this pleasure driving, you've heard about it, where children take a car and drive anyhow.
I think they call it joyriding.
Joy
I think I've heard something
for
like
example,
that, joyriding, yes.
So this is because of this relative freedom we are talking about, where parents do not have enough time to really coach their children, to do things together with them, to tell them about the do's and don'ts. Another very important aspect is moral development. During our time, and in some circles even today, people taught their children what is correct and what is wrong. You cannot do this, you cannot do that. It's not moral. It's this, it's that.
Don't parents still do the same thing?
But today,
they still do?
No, not so. Many parents are very negligent, I'm telling you. You are sitting here as a journalist, but you don't go to Caraba police station, where I go sometimes to advise. You don't go to Cadiz court, where I go sometimes to advise. You don't have a clinic like I have. The problems that parents bring to my clinic, a mental health clinic, you know what I mean? And you are not teaching, I don't know. So I know what I'm talking about. Not, as I said, there are still some very good parents who have the ability now, despite the modern times or setting, to be able to adapt the traditional or cultural upbringing with the modern phenomenon or circumstances. And their children are quite relatively harmonious. They have some Western influence, but they still, what is expected of a human being, I mean, they are upright, you know, in their behavior, in their responsibility, less crime, you know, in general. But there are many children, I'm telling you also, who unfortunately, we blame the kids, have gone astray because they haven't had the opportunity, or the parents maybe do not give them enough. Again, another dimension is that where children start having children, because this was very rare during our childhood days, or maybe in some circles, before you could get a child, you first had to be married, and secondly, you had to reach a certain age. But now you see, how do you explain that? That a child of 12, a schoolboy of 12, pregnates a girl of 13.
Some of the ills of living in an urban city.
Urban and modern, this modern thing you are talking about.
Thing, yeah.
And the influence.
It certainly has its
influence,
underbelly.
this tripartite or three-factor influence we are talking. So it is our responsibility to define how we want to use the traditional techniques or methods, combine them with the modern facilities, and see and to bring our children, to bring up our children, so that they'll be more acceptable and they'll be stronger emotionally and psychologically to cope with that, because their time is very, as you said, complex and full of and stressful. Their challenges are very stressful, and unfortunately, as I was trying to explain, they are not as equipped as we have been in terms of emotional support, in terms of training in those aspects of life that I had described.
So now, how do we help? Given our youth bulge, I think about 60% of the population are really under the age of 25, and we know all these tension, the stresses of modern time. So how do we deal with it in our mood, in this process of reform we are in? We want to reform, we want to change the corruption, for instance. We talk about it all the time. Yes. So I, as an individual, when I go to work, how should I behave?
No, I agree with you.
That sort of thing.
It has to be both at the micro and macro level. Micro meaning home as institution, schools, kindergarten, daycare up to university. And at the macro level, communities, governments should come in also, and so on. I think we should engage these children, when I say children now, a bit more than we seem to be doing. Let us stop this blame game. When I mean, just saying our children are this, they have no respect, they are violent, they have no upbringing, they are disobedient, they are deviant. What makes them deviant? That's a psychologist will ask, you see. Maybe the lawyer will say, yes, that's breaking the law, maybe. But the psychology will see what makes him, what are the circumstances that make them deviant, and what can we do, because psychologists are not judgmental. We look at your reaction and we try to find out why you react the way you react, and to see how can I help him to reform. You started with the word reform, or to stabilize, or to change from undesirable to desirable psychologically, using techniques, behavioristic techniques, psychoanalytic techniques, humanistic techniques, cognitive psychology, or cognitive behavioral techniques, using techniques too. But definitely we should engage the children more. For example, you go to an average home in the urban areas. Now we talk about urban. You hardly see a parent talking to the child for 1 hour or doing things together. You tell your child, let's go to the farm. At adolescence, the peers are more powerful in urban areas than the parents. The peers, they listen more to the peers. The child will tell you, oh, our football club is going to play, so I cannot go to the farm. You go to the farm, you bring in mangoes or orange, and he'll eat it. But he will not go, he doesn't want to go. And maybe the mother will tell you, this is your time. You are a farmer. These ones don't know this farming stuff. As long as he's going to school. I'm telling you, this happens. Yeah. It's something that is real. Not all mothers. So we don't have enough time with the children. We do not direct them. We do not give them enough counseling. We do not give them enough information. We do not engage them enough. We do not involve them enough. Many of them don't know their children. So you go to the school, unfortunately now the attitude of parents towards the school is very bad. You discipline a child, the average urban parent would do what? What would the average urban parent do?
And in their discipline, I mean, for instance, psychologically, for instance, corporal punishment,
no, I'm not talking,
is it a good thing? But is it, what do you think psychologically?
Corporal punishment could be a part of discipline, but it's an aversive method of disciplining a person. And that should be the last resort. Even in schools, if I remember right, I'm a teacher too, before a headmaster beats a child, you have to record it, and there has to be a reason, and only the headmaster is allowed or somebody delegated. Now beating, corporal punishment is abolished in schools. But let's say you ask a child to go and water a garden bed. That's also discipline. Stand there, your behavior is very bad, you stand there or stand by the door and wait. So you feel that definitely what I've done is next time, if you are sensible, you don't want to do it. But some parents would, they'll go to the minister. Why was my child? You see? So because of that, the teachers become laissez-faire, laissez-faire, permissive. So you see, the cooperation between the home and the school is another thing. Headmasters have told me this, even today, even normal. So I think the children, there has to be an understanding between the home and the school. Certain principles and policies. You do have parent. I'm the chairman of Bakau Parent Senior Management Committee, and we try to work together, the primary school, lower basic, to see how we can harmonize.
To stronger PTAs.
Exactly, our upbringing efforts. Now at community level, when young people, for example, now they are frustrated about something, what is important is engage them. Try to find out who their leaders are, or go and sit down and talk to them. This avoidance behavior, avoiding talking to the young people, does not help. Waiting until the last minute, I'll say, okay, if they demonstrate or protest, I will just ask the para to go and squash it down. That is not the solution, because the underlying problem has not been solved. You keep them quiet for a moment, but sooner or later something else may erupt. So the best is, it should be proactively engaging these young people.
So more communication.
That's communication, dialogue. Dialogue, communication with them. Involve them.
And also listening to them.
Listening
mainly.
As a psychologist anyway, the number one value or quality of a therapist is listening. You listen. In fact, you don't even say, you can say to the client, how about, what do you think? He does the thinking, not you. You listen and guide. If a child tells you, oh, my mother hates me, She has not called me for 1 month. And she used to call me every week. She's not sending me any money. She hates me now. I hate my mother. Then you say, well, have you found out why she has not called you? And your mother who brought you from it, she could have killed you. And at this age, you have not. Have you made any attempt to call her? What are the possibilities that may be the hindrance? And you say, it could be that. She say, it could be that. Oh, it could be that. Fine, it could be. Find out. Because she may mean good. She may be in trouble. What do you think? Oh, yeah, maybe I should. This is how you deal with these young people. How do we solve this problem? In my experience for how many years as a teacher, by the way, you forgot to mention that I was a teacher here. Maybe I didn't tell you that. Yes. I trained at Unum College, graduated in '67, taught at Amity, Krabar, St. Augustine's, Latrikunda. But before that, I've been teaching in primary, so I have the experience of primary teaching also. There's one good technique with these young people. No matter how angry they are, if you are able to meet them at an appropriate moment, sit with them, go down to their level and talk to them. And then ask them how they think this problem should be solved without, they should be fair to you too, or to the state and so on. They will solve what they need generally, in my experience as a teacher and as a psychologist, is that they want to be recognized, they want to be heard, they want to be, appeased, not to be blamed, don't be subjective. You know what I mean? And that's the tendency of many of our people. We are subjective. We said, you are this, you are that, you. When sometimes we may be the ones who make them that kind of you. So I think engaging them, and as you said, dialogue, communication, constant. And I think we should learn to be state or parents, more proactive than reactive.
Absolutely.
This is my common phrase. Yeah. We don't wait until there's a problem, then we react. But if we are with constantly, honestly, familiarity, it does not always breed contempt. Sometimes it breeds confidence.
Absolutely. I think though we should maybe spend the last 2 or 3 minutes. We're coming to the end of the program, on just to talk a bit on.
It's too short.
Human motivation. I mean, I've read some psychologists say that humans tend to think that they're motivated more by moral precepts and principles, but really there are other drives, like being avaricious, being power hungry, or even vanity.
It's
some
not
of
only,
these things.
I agree with you there. No, motivation theory tells us that we have drives, we call it N. Now I'll tell you, N, let me teach you a little bit. N need for activity. N achievement means need for achievement. Now let's continue. N power, need for, say it. Need for power.
Need for power, yes.
N status.
It's for status.
N money, need for money.
Exactly. So you have all
so the human being has needs, and primary needs up to secondary or tertiary needs. The basic primary needs are food,
of course, yes.
Drink, basic, sex,
yes.
satisfaction, you feel you are healthy. Those are basic.
I'm thinking
like
of Maslow's thing. Exactly.
Pyramid.
Yes,
Maslow's pyramid. Yes, those are even not only Maslow. Other, motivation theories have said similar, but in different ways. So, but these are the basic needs in general. That we need the basic food, drink, shelter, and so on.
That's it.
Then you have secondary needs, and the motivation cycle is such that once one need is satisfied, another need comes. The human being is never satisfied until pay low. You go to primary, you go to high school, you go to university, you graduate, you have a job. What's the next need? Maybe you want to marry. The next need, you want a car. Next thing, you want a small farm. Next thing, you want to help send your mother to Mecca. So the need is a cycle.
Absolutely. So once one of them is satisfied, another one just pops up. Once we understand the complexity, all these different demands on us, then this self-awareness may allow us to regulate more negative aspects of what we are, because we keep on saying that we are so corrupt in our African society, the corruption in government, the lies, and then people, ordinary human beings are suffering. It's important for us to know ourselves, then we'll really know how to govern.
That's
in
true.
many ways.
You're right. Again, the psychologists will ask, why are people corrupt? What makes them corrupt? When they I'm not encouraging that the government senior officials or whoever should be looting or embezzling government money. No. And I think it's a question of contentment also. But definitely, if you don't know yourself, as you said, aware of your identity, I'm using the word identity, then
which in itself is fluid.
Yeah, then you cannot, if you don't know where you come from, it's difficult to know where you are going. However, in criticizing, it's always good to look at the circumstances, the factors that make, from our perspective, the person behave, and what can you do to help the person to realize the predicament and to change by you encouraging the person to change. Not you changing him,
of course,
encouraging him, understanding being aware of his or her predicament and helping that person to effect the changes with your guidance.
That is the challenge. I think this is the challenge for every individual. That's the challenge for the nation. Thank you very much. I'm Professor Lamin Sidibe. We've come to the end. I wish that we could have gone on, but these things, you cannot exhaust them in just 55 minutes. Thank you very much, viewers, for joining us today on The Viewpoint. Until the next time, I'm Mahmoud Mboj. Goodbye.